Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 5, Day 3. But first, let's do our daily punishment. What do you call a ghost of a chicken? A poultrygeist. Alright, kiddos, key terms for today are Commodore Vanderbilt, Jay Gould, the Westinghouse air brake, the Interstate Commerce Commission, the Grange movement, the Wabash case, refrigerator trains, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, the Bessemer Steel process, Andrew Carnegie, the Gospel of Wealth, vertical integration, horizontal integration, John D Rockefeller, interlocking directories, J.P. Morgan, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and social Darwinism. We're going to go over causes and effects of industrialization. This is the second industrial revolution in the latter 19th century in America, late 1800s. We're going to go over some of the technological inventions and effects in this era. And we're going to talk about some of the big industrialists and their effect on American industrial revolution. They were called the captains of industry by some, robber barons by others. So let's talk about some of the OG captains. The first real industrialist that became a multimillionaire was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's going to make millions of dollars in steamboats. He will turn to railroads. He'll make over $100 million. Under him, he's going to incorporate the Westinghouse air brake, which is a new type of brake that was used in railroads. He'll also use Pullman palaces, which were types of railroads that were used for leisure. That would be able to transport people. They could stay there. They could sleep in the train. He'll replace iron tracks in railroads with steel rails. He will give some of his money away. One of the things that's really ironic about a lot of these robber barons, these rich industrialists, they hated labor unions. They hated the workers, but they often did give a lot of their monies away to charity. So really kind of complicated people. Jay Gould, we talked about before. He was involved in the gold market, the gold scandal. If you remember, the gold market scandal was when him and Fisk tried to corner all the gold in America. It led to a huge depression and wild speculation. Black Friday, it almost sunk the American economy, and one of Grant's relatives was involved. Gould is going to trade money in stocks for railroads to make money. He will bribe judges and officials. The Interstate Commerce Act is going to be passed in 1887 under Cleveland. Railroads at this time were super corrupt in America. Railroads actually were given a lot of land by the federal government in order to build. Railroads were a necessity to connect the country. Railroads were given more land than the whole size of Texas. During the time, the government will receive preferential long-term rates for mail and military by railroads. By them granting cheap land to railroads, it was a way to subsidize the need for transportation. Some of the major railroads that will be created will be the Union Pacific, the Central Pacific, and there'll be other ones in the Southwest and the North. During this time in the Gilded Age, we will have the first transcontinental railroad. Farmers will dislike railroads because they thought they were slaves to railroad cost. Railroads will force farmers into bankruptcy due to high costs to transport crops. Also, a lot of times railroads will try to pressure farmers to sell their land so they can build a railroad there. Sometimes they'll use violence to get farmers to sell their land. The Grange movement was the first group created to try to deal with railroads. They'll pressure state governments to try to push rates on how much railroads could charge. So some states will actually try to limit how much railroads could charge, and they can't discriminate in who they pay for. The Supreme Court, however, will overturn this. In the Wabash case, the Supreme Court will say that states have no power to regulate interstate commerce, so they can't be regulating railroad rates. In 1887, Congress will pass the Interstate Commerce Act. This is going to require railroads to publish their rates to, make it more accountable. It's going to outlaw discrimination, how they can't charge more for one group against another. It's going to outlaw how what would happen before is railroads would charge more if you went a short distance than if you went a long distance. This makes it illegal. This is the first attempt by Washington to regulate business, to actually regulate big business. There were a lot of holes in this law, so for the most part, this won't be super enforced, and there was ways for railroads to get around this. There's the ICC. During this time, there's going to be a lot of inventions. We'll have a lot of mechanization. There'll be new cheap labor. We have new people coming to America. They're called new immigrants. We'll talk about them in the next video, but there's a whole, in the late 1800s, you have people coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. You have new type of steel, which is called Bessemer steel, which was stronger and cheaper. You have mass production in America with like the assembly line, which was created by Henry Ford. You have high urbanization. You have the refrigerator railroad, and the refrigerator railroad is going to allow for goods to be transported without, like, food products without going bad. Alexander Graham Bell will create the telephone. Thomas Edison is going to create the telegraph, which is like it records like sound. He creates the incandescent light bulb, which is going to allow things to stay lit up even after dark. It actually makes people be able to work longer. He creates the phonograph. He creates cement. He creates an early version of the battery for a car. And the phonograph was the thing that recorded sound, where the telegraph allows you to like send a message to a different part of the country. Like a very early version of an email, like using Morse code. Here's an assembly line for Ford Motor. There is going to be urbanization and mechanization during this time. And the whole idea of the assembly line is people were each given a different job in the factory. They would only focus on that. That way, a person that doesn't need to know how to make the whole car. They just worry about their one part, like I'm the one that puts the tires on the car. That's going to allow for mass production. It's going to make it more efficient. It also makes it more boring. But it's going to allow for increase in production. Andrew Carnegie is going to be an immigrant from Scotland that comes to America. He came very poor. He is going to become one of the richest men in American history. He was the steel king. He's going to integrate every phase in making steel in America. He'll mine the iron. He'll ship it. And then he'll have the railroad ship it to the factories. And in the factories, he'll turn that iron into steel. This is called vertical integration. This is bottom to top. This is where like you own all the different stages of making the product. Another example of vertical monopoly would be like if McDonald's owned the farms in order to get all the food products. Steel will become cheaper during this time because of a new type of steel called Bessemer steel process. Eventually, Carnegie will sell his company to J.P. Morgan. It will be the first billion-dollar company. One of the big ideas of Andrew Carnegie was the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth is an idea that he had. It's kind of justification for the rich. The gospel of wealth did say that the wealthy were given their money from God, and they were given their money and their success from God. But even though they were given their money from God, they have an obligation to help out society. So there is like some kind of obligation involved. For Carnegie, that meant that he gave away a lot of his money to organizations before he died. He gave away $350 million to libraries, pensions, professors. Carnegie Hall was created under him. That really shows the whole idea of the gospel of wealth. John D Rockefeller is going to be another person. He's going to be an oil baron. He's going to do horizontal monopoly or horizontal integration. He'll try to buy up all the competitors, so there's only one oil company, his, Standard Oil. That's a horizontal monopoly. That would be like if there's only one fast food place, and that's McDonald's, and there's no Taco Bell or anything. He wanted to monopolize a market. No competition. One of the things that he would do is he would do something called interlocking directories, where he would buy up a competitor on the DL. Then he would appoint his people that worked for him in the as CEOs of the other companies. So they would really be doing what he says. That's called interlocking directories, which was kind of illegal, but not really. Like a lot of these robber barons found ways around the law. At the height of his power, he'll control 95% of all oil industries in America. Here's a very famous cartoon of Standard Oil, the octopus that is reaching out and controlling everything. One of the big things during this time is, we'll actually talk about in a second. James Pierpont Morgan was the banker's banker. He's going to create one of the biggest banking industries in America. He'll later buy out Carnegie. You should know the difference between trust versus monopolies. Trust is when there's a few companies in an industry. Monopoly is when there's one. There were other trusts in America during this time: sugar, meat, tobacco. We'll talk about the tobacco one next class. One of the things that business people used to justify their wealth during this time is social Darwinism. They took the idea of natural selection from Charles Darwin and they applied it to race and to economics. These people more applied it to economics. They said they were made wealthy since they worked harder and they were the ones made wealthy. They deserve it. And the people that don't survive in a capitalist system don't deserve to survive. They should just it's natural selection. So they tried to apply Darwin's ideas to economics. In 1890, Congress will pass the Sherman Antitrust Act, which will try to forbid the combination of monopolies. However, most of Congress people were still very pro-business, so even though this was meant to go against monopolies, the government will actually use this law to go against labor unions, which was not the purpose of it. This is a very famous cartoon over some of the monopolies. There's really two ways of looking at these monopolies during this time, or you could have a more nuanced and see truth in both of them. One way is they're captains of industry. These people like Carnegie, Rockefeller were they were adventurous. They took risks with their own money. They gave money to the poor. They helped industrialize America. They were captains of industry. That's a more positive view. The other view is more negative. They were robber barons. They exploited the poor. They used illegal, unethical methods, and they concentrated wealth amongst themselves. All right, kiddos, that's all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces, deuces, yeah.